we call people selected by government to get special favors. Now, if you want to give someone a favor, fine. Some rich business wants to, fine. They and you spend your own money. And unlike government, you can't use force. But government uses force when it gives out favors. It taxes you and me to give money and often special privileges to chosen ones, usually rich people with connections. And as government grows, it gives out more favors, like handouts to green, so-called green energy companies, or union car makers. And most recently, the really big money went to bankers on Wall Street. This causes a great deformation and corruption of capitalism, says a former Reagan budget director who just wrote a book about that, David Stockman. So, what do you mean the great deformation?
The state has failed. It's overwhelmed. Fiscally, it is out of control. It is paralyzed because it can't make decisions because it's trying to do too much, and in the process, the private economy is being badly harmed, deeply undermined as a result of trying to make it better. In other words, the Keynesian premise that we've had for decades is turning out to be upside down.
The defenders of state intervention cite the housing bubble bursting. They had to come in and rescue the banks, they say.
Well, I don't think that's remotely accurate. I think that's an urban legend. I've addressed this. I call it the BlackBerry Panic of 2008.
Why the BlackBerry Panic?
Because all of the key policymakers, Paulson and all the guys running around the Treasury, were carrying around this diagnostic tool, the BlackBerry. They were watching the stock price of Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. They were looking at credit spreads. They were looking at stock market indices and so forth. And I say it's a fundamentally wrong way to make policy. You can't let the boys and girls and robots on Wall Street drive policy, which is exactly what was happening. There was only a failure going on in the canyons of Wall Street. The Main Street banking system was not in trouble in September 2008.
But what they were seeing on their BlackBerries were prices crashing, what seemed like that the whole system would freeze up, and that would cause massive hardship.
Well, that was the lurid story told over and over by Paulson.
People still believe it, not just Paulson.
Well, he was driving the thing. Bernanke is the greatest money printer, Keynesian monetary central
These
planner.
are smart guys. They said, I'll give you a quote, Paulson, this bold approach will cost American families far less than the alternative.
How did he possibly know? He couldn't have known. If you read his memoir, he said, I got a call from Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs. He's worried the shorts are coming after Morgan Stanley. They'll take it down. I'm going to be next. You have to do something. Guess what happened? They bailed out Morgan Stanley. They went after TARP and all the rest of it.
Goldman and Morgan went down.
It would have not made any difference.
There would have been a credit freeze.
No, there wouldn't have. That is just a lot of baloney, okay? This is the urban legend that has been repeated over and over because basically the cronies of capitalism had pulled a coup d'etat. George Bush was clueless. He had no idea what was going on.
He said, I've abandoned free market principles to save the free market.
Well, I mean, that's as kind of silly as almost everything else he said. AIG was not a contagious disease. It was not going to cause a huge problem. We can look at that. The Main Street banks were not going to go into a huge retail bank run. The money market funds were not going to collapse and cause the economic system to go down a black hole. And Bernanke's totally wrong when he says we were on the verge of Depression 2.0. We weren't close. We would have worked our way through it. We've done it many times in history before. And this, as I say, was a Wall Street coup d'etat that really needs to be understood because, frankly, they're just doing the same thing over and over.
So why then, when the Republicans seemed like they were going to vote against the bailout, did the stock market drop 700 plus points?
Because the stock market is a whore. It's a totally dishonest place.
Predictive place. They were worried.
No, the stock market, I know that a lot of conservatives and free market people think, well, the stock market is pricing, discounting the future. The market believes the job of the taxpayer in America is to open his veins whenever necessary with fiscal subventions, with monetary largesse, whatever it takes to keep the stock price stock index rising, because that's what the speculators want. This is why we're in trouble, because both parties have basically thrown in the towel and are essentially just aggregating mechanisms for special interest groups that are plundering.
Right, and the special interest group, in this case, it's the chosen one, are the banks.
If they're too big to fail, they're too big to exist. They need to be broken up. They're dangerous. We have done nothing.
If you say break them up, that's giving government more power.
No, it isn't, because the way I would break them up is very simply saying, you want to be big and huge and be a danger to the whole financial system? Fine. You can't go to the Fed window. You don't have deposit insurance. You want to be free enterprise? Get out there in the market and compete.
Well, I think we'd be on better footing, but you and I are sure in the minority about this. I hope others will get more skeptical about bailouts. Thank you, David Stockman. And of course, it's not just Wall Street that's politically connected. When government's big special privileges